Today we're going to dig into a really chilling question. What happens when a man knows he's becoming a monster, begs for help, and is just flat out ignored? This is the story of Carroll Cole, and honestly, it's a story about the very systems that are supposed to protect us and how badly they can fail. So let's start here. These are the words of a serial killer, Carroll Cole, just a few hours before he was executed. And that simple answer, yes, yes, it points to a story that's not just about some remorseless evil, but something way more complicated and, frankly, way more disturbing. He's not fighting his fate at all. In fact, he actively went after it. And to really understand how a man gets to that point, literally begging for his own death, well, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. Cole's path from being a victim to becoming an offender is a seriously chilling one. And it starts, like it so often does, in his childhood, where the seeds of violence were planted really early and really deep. Okay, you really have to let this sink in, because the contrast here is just staggering. On one hand, you have a certified genius, an IQ of 152. On the other hand, you have a kid living through an absolute nightmare. His mother would force him to watch her with other men, and then she'd beat him if he said a word about it. At school, kids bullied him constantly for his name. This wasn't just trauma. This was like the active construction of a monster. What's so terrifying when you look at this timeline is how clear the escalation is. At 5, he's the victim. By 7, he's killing animals. And then at just 8 years old, he commits his first murder. But it gets ruled an accident, and the very first chance to stop him is completely missed. So, as an adult, that monster that was built in his childhood really starts to stir. And here's the truly remarkable part. Cole knew it was happening. He was terrified of what he was turning into, and he desperately tried to get someone, anyone, to stop him. Just think about that for a second. This guy walked into police stations, into mental hospitals, and he confessed that he had these overwhelming urges to rape and strangle women. He was pretty much begging the system to lock him up before he did something horrible. And this chart just perfectly shows how the system had no idea what it was dealing with. Just look at these diagnoses. They're all over the place. Was he a sociopath, schizophrenic, or was he just a malingerer, someone faking it all? They couldn't figure it out, and while they were debating, a time bomb was ticking. And this right here, this is the moment the system didn't just fail him, it failed every single person he would go on to kill. A psychiatrist, Dr. Felix Peebles, just decided Cole was a highly manipulative guy looking for a free meal and a place to stay. He dismissed all of Cole's pleas and ordered him to be released. So this kicks off a catastrophic revolving door. He'd beg for help, but the doctors would label him with a personality disorder, which they saw as untreatable, not a mental illness, which they could treat. So they'd say, well, he's not technically mentally ill, and they'd let him go. And every single time he walked out that door, the monster inside him just got bigger and stronger. And then, you're not going to believe this, it gets to the point where one hospital's solution is to literally give him a one-way bus ticket out of the state. They didn't solve the problem, they just packed it up and made it someone else's problem. So at this point, with every single door to getting help slammed shut in his face, Cole just gives up. He's free. And he starts to act on all those horrifying fantasies he warned everyone about, unleashing all that pent-up rage on the world. For the next 9 years, he goes on this absolutely horrific killing spree across 5 different states. Now, he was only convicted of 5 murders, but he confessed to as many as 35. The real number? We'll probably never know. In his twisted mind, his victims all had one thing in common. They reminded him of his mother. He went after women he saw as loose or unfaithful. He said it himself. With every woman he strangled, he was really just trying to kill his mother. Over and over and over again. So, after he's finally arrested for good in 1980, the guy who spent years begging to be locked up now starts begging for something completely different. He decided he wanted to die, and he was going to use the legal system to make it happen. Get this, he was already serving life without parole in Texas. He could have just stayed there. But no, he chose to be sent to Nevada, specifically because it was a state with a death penalty. He literally called it his attempt to commit legal suicide. He just systematically tore down any legal protection he had. He pleaded guilty to everything. He fired lawyers who tried to save his life. He refused every single appeal. He stood up in court and said, point blank, "There's nothing good about me. Nothing left to save." So when the judge finally gave him the death sentence, Cole's response was just two chilling words. That's all the confirmation anyone needed that he had finally gotten exactly what he'd been fighting for. And that brings us right back to where we started. In his final hours on death row, a reporter asks him the one question that really hangs over his entire tragic story. And there you have it. In the end, his own judgment of himself was just as clear and just as final as the one the state handed down. He truly believed he deserved to die. Look, the case of Carroll Cole isn't just another true crime story. It's a damning look at a system that just refused to listen. And it leaves us with a really tough, unsettling question. When a man who is about to become a monster is screaming for help and nobody listens, who's really responsible for the lives that are lost?